this is the tool that I have kind of created from poker, right? Don't get hung up on the name. I'm not a big, in terms of naming things. My skills and competencies for branding are pretty poor. But really what the mental hand history is all about is taking what poker players were doing, which was handing hand histories, right? Where it's just a kind of pure record of the hand, all the details, stack sizes, betting action, and actually the cards, and sending it to coaches to review. And I wanted to create something that was similar to that for poker players. And you know, the mental hand history was created. And so this is what it is. Okay. Let me make this a tick larger here so you can see. All right. And so I'm gonna give you some examples, but let's just kind of talk through the construct here. The first step is to describe the problem in detail, right? And so if you're doing this on your own, basically, like, look, if you had the opportunity to sit in a coaching session with me, what would you say? What would you tell me is the problem that you are struggling with, right? And you might have many problems, and so you can do a mental hand history for each one of those problems, right? But just pick one and describe it in as much detail as you can, right? The more details, the better, right? Because if you kind of leave out details as we kind of go through this, it will get a little bit harder. Now, the second step, explain why it makes logical sense that you have this problem, or why you think, feel, or react this way. Now, I pinpoint that word logical because so many people think that their problems are irrational and they're illogical. And the reality is that, you know, unless you have some severe mental disorder, okay, one that would require psychiatric assistance, I believe that every kind of performance-based issue that we have has some logical reason behind it, okay? And so right now it feels or seems irrational or illogical, but that's simply because you don't understand the rationality or the logic for why it occurs. So a lot of people get stuck here. Begin to sort of shift your mentality and try to describe why it makes sense that you have greed or FOMO, or you're lazy, or you're procrastinating, or you're losing confidence. Like, what's the logic behind that? Why does it make sense? Okay. And again, I'll give you some examples. Then step 3, okay, explain why that logic is flawed. Of course, there is something wrong here, right? Of course, there is a flaw behind this, right? You wouldn't have the problem if there was not some flaw here, right? And so, right, in the trading book, in the poker book, right, I talk about lots of different examples of these flaws or biases, right? They could be black or white thinking, the illusion of control, hindsight bias, expecting perfection, right? Sometimes there can be this sort of hybrid between a technical flaw and a mental game flaw. And so you're basically just trying to figure out what the heck is wrong here, okay? Now, if you go technical, make sure that you still focus on the psychological side, okay? That's one of the bigger problems here. The other thing is that your emotions are never flawed, okay? Right? Again, we go back to this idea of having, you know, kind of a rock in your shoe, right? If you're walking around with a rock in your shoe and you feel pain, what's the problem? The pain or the rock? Should be obvious, right? It's the rock. The rock is the problem. Emotions are the signal, like the pain when you step on a rock as you're walking, right? The signal is not the flaw. The signal is the messenger. Don't kill the messenger. Understand what the message is actually telling you. That change in perspective is important, and you got to make sure that at step 3, you're not blaming the anger. You're not blaming the lack of confidence. That is not the problem. Or sorry, that's not the flaw, right? That's a symptom or a signal of the flaw, okay? The flaw is something deeper, okay? Then make sure, okay, that you are, as you get to step 4 here, that you are correcting what you found in step 3. So often, right, we end up kind of battling on the surface, right? So you've got this lack of confidence, and so you're battling up against, like, oh no, you should be confident. Listen, you got a great track record. You've had years of profitability. You're successful, right? Of course, but right, so you battle like that on the surface, and but what happens, right? Under extreme stress, that thinking part of the brain responsible for that fighting just disappears because it can't hold up, and you're just left with the lack of confidence, which keeps you underperforming relative to what you can do, right? So that's not how you battle it. You need to understand why it is that you're lacking confidence. And when I go back to where I was in 1997, you know, having choked, trying to qualify for the US Open, right? This is what I needed, right? The material that I read was more about this sort of surface level battling, right? Trying to boost my confidence, trying to get me to relax and handle stress better by reducing that intensity and pressure. And listen, it's not that those are not bad ideas. They can work. For me, they didn't. And for a lot of people that I end up working with, I think a lot of those of you that are here, you need something deeper. And so this is the process that gets to that depth. All right. And then step 5 is a bit of a bonus, right? Explain why that correction is correct. And the way that I would kind of pitch the utility of that step is kind of like if you were planting a tree. In fact, actually, we planted a tree in my yard last year, right? So what do? 2 stakes in the ground, right? Make that thing really taut so that if there's a big windstorm and there's a big rainstorm, right, ground is kind of saturated and, the wind's not going to just blow the sucker over, right? Because the roots haven't actually solidified in the ground to be able to hold itself up. Well, a year later, we took the stakes out. The tree is thriving, okay? So for you to get this logic strong enough to correct that flaw and consistent enough so that you can kind of handle that intense stress, right? You need step 5, right?